So, hi, Martin. Thank you for coming along for part two of this interview. I think there was some really good feedback based on our last interview that we did on the channel. So, as you're back by popular demand, so welcome back. Welcome back.
Not something I hear very often from my kids. He's back by popular demand.
No, I think it's one of the best performing interviews I've done so far, and it was the comments have been really lovely as well. Everyone's been really supportive of your story, and I think it's nice to have another UK view on things, and also your experience and the stuff you've been through is really struck a nerve with people. So thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for coming back.
No, it's an absolute pleasure, and I've been very humbled by the feedback and the response. The comments have been absolutely amazing. You seem to have a very thoughtful, very refined audience, and I mean, your channel's not that old, and yet some of the comments were really insightful. So
I think it's one of the we were talking just before we hit the record button here about how it surprised me the most at how nice and supportive and thoughtful the community are on YouTube, because Scientology paints this picture that SPs are these bad, horrible, nasty people that don't want you to succeed in life, and actually everyone has been really, really nice in the comments, and helping each other out and supporting each other, and it's been the biggest, nicest surprise I could possibly imagine.
No, totally, and that's kind of what I wanted to elaborate a little bit more on in this part two, because one or two of the comments specifically said, can you talk more about the recovery process or the post Scientology experience? And I'm very happy to do that. So
absolutely,
yeah.
Why don't we start with that and go into that straight away? What has your recovery process been like? Because you left Scientology 2009, was it? You left, right? So yeah, what did you do? What were your first days like out of Scientology? Maybe how did you leave? Right? I don't think we covered that in the last video. What were the last few days of your time like in Scientology?
Sure. Well, we talked a little bit about my interaction with Graham Wilson, or lack of it. The interaction was all on my side rather than his side. And it was just very obvious to me that I was never going to get the answers to the questions that I wanted answered. So once I learned about the abuses at the Int base in particular, and seeing the videos of people that I've known personally, like Mike Rinder. Well, I didn't know him actually personally at that time, but I'd seen him many times at events. But Mike Rinder, Steve Hall, Steve Hall, I think. Anyway, a whole bunch of these people who and if there's one thing I'd learned, whether it's from Scientology or where I'd always known it, I know when somebody's lying and when they're not. I can detect that. These people were not lying; they were just telling the truth. So I thought, well, either people in OSA and in the church, they either know that this is all happening and they're fine with it, or they are so oblivious to the truth that they're too far gone to be able to do anything effective. So either way, it didn't make any sense for me to stay in the church, and I was in the relatively fortunate position of not having the disconnection wasn't the thing hanging over me particularly, because as anybody that's watched part one will know, I was the only one in my family that joined Scientology. I'm not from a Scientology family at all. By the way, anybody that hasn't watched part one, you really should. Or Alex will probably route you to ethics and get his meter out and set check you. So I was in a relatively fortunate position from that point of view. So yes, it was difficult, and yet it was an easy decision to make at the same time, if that makes sense. So yeah, as I said in the last one, so I read this resignation letter, and there was still a lot, obviously, going around my head about what the consequences could be, and you are essentially leaving and throwing away everything that you've invested emotionally, spiritually, and financially for a very, very long time in my case. So, it wasn't particularly easy, and yet I knew intuitively it was the right decision to make. And I also knew, I didn't know how, but I knew that there were steps, that I could take, and actions that I could do, and books that I could read, and that would enable me to find another place. I wasn't looking to join another religion straight away. That's not what I mean. I just meant that I just hoped intuitively that there would be enough support and information to be able to help me. And on that point, one of the first people I spoke to after I left was a lovely guy called John Dignan. Do you know him? An Irish. If you can get him on your channel, he would be well worth it. He wrote an interesting book called The Complex. He'd left a number of years before me, and one of the things he said to me was, "Watch some Derren Brown videos." I thought, okay, fair. So all right then. So I watched a few, and then I watched a few more, and then I watched a few more, and it suddenly kind of dawned on me why he'd been saying this, because a lot of what Derren Brown does is using the power of suggestion and sort of hypnosis, but not really hypnosis, just using the power of suggestion to get people to do things, and that's a big part of his of what he does. So I saw some parallels there, but I read a lot of different books, not just books from ex-Scientologists or about Scientology, but related books and information on how mind control works. Another guy that, if you can get him onto your channel, would be a fantastic guest is John Atack. I read a lot of his stuff. The guy is. I'm a know-nothing Dumbo compared to him. He's like multiple PhD level on how thought control works. He'd be very interesting. So that was a lot of the first things I did when I left.
Yeah, and I think they're definitely really interesting people. I wasn't aware of John Dignan, but John Atack, I've seen a lot of his videos, and his videos have been really helpful in my recovery as well. And it's interesting you say about Derren Brown, because I was thinking about this. Who was it I was speaking to? I can't remember who I was speaking to about this, but Derren Brown came up in conversation, and I thought it would be fascinating to have him dissect some of the Scientology training routines, the TRs, because of his knowledge in hypnosis and how that works, and power of suggestion and all that sort of thing. I found it really fascinating watching his videos and drawing similarities between techniques and TRs that are used in Scientology. What are your thoughts on, because in Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard wrote that there isn't such thing as hypnosis in Scientology. We don't do anything to do with hypnosis. That's separate. It's not a thing. And yet John Atack actually has done quite a few videos on this, comparing hypnosis and how there are hypnotic techniques used in Scientology, particularly the TRs, the training routines, bull baiting and things like this. They are very hypnotic in their nature, and there is writing where L. Ron Hubbard said at the very beginning that auditors have to be fully trained on hypnosis and have to read books on hypnosis. And in the original Dianetics, book 1, there was a talk about going into this state of reverie, which is a hypnotic trance state, effectively. And yet they outwardly deny they don't use hypnosis, and it's completely separate to that. What are your thoughts on that side of things, the use of hypnosis in Scientology?
Well, it's definitely there. So Hubbard learned hypnosis, I think, at the age of 16. He was well practiced in it. He understood how it worked very well. And I believe, and again I'm referencing John Atack here, I believe he said, never trust a hypnotist. but he was a master hypnotist himself. John Asak also said that Scientology is, in his words, the most extreme form of mind control ever devised. I think a lot of it is because it very cleverly. What you do is you almost hypnotizing yourself in the sense. It's not the traditional view of hypnotism where you put your attention on one point, or there's the swinging pendulum and so on. It's not necessarily like that at all. So in a lot of the lectures, for example, you'll find the L. Ron Hubbard lectures. You'll find a lot of really mad, garbled stuff that he's going on about, and it sort of confuses you. And then he'll sort of ram in this kind of datum, as he would call it, at the end of this, rambling datum. So this is another classic hypnotic technique: is you sort of create a confusion in the person. You sort of momentarily sort of throw them off guard, off balance, and then you slam in a command. So that there's a lot of all that going on. And I think yes, the TRs definitely. Anybody that's done TR0, and let's face it, any Scientologist has done hours and hours and hours, probably hundreds of hours of TR0, will know that you cannot not go into a state of a trance-like condition. It's impossible not to. So there is a lot of hypnotism, but it's cleverly woven in. It's not very overt.
I think that runs true with a lot of stuff in Scientology as well. The idea of doing it yourself, self brainwashing, or whatever terminology you want to use. Because one of the things they would say to me when I first started in Scientology is the main difference between Scientology and a lot of other religions is there's no element of faith. You go into a Christian church and they give you the Bible, and you either believe the story of Jesus or you don't. You have to make the decision, and it's a thing of faith, question of faith. Whereas in Scientology, there's no one there telling you to believe in something. You read it, you apply it, you try it, and it either works or it doesn't, and you see the results yourself. And it's kind of true that you're sat there in the course room, you're reading text, you're doing different things, you're learning, and you're teaching yourself rather than someone telling you what to believe. And because of that, a lot of it is done yourself. Obviously, when you get to TRs and things, you have a twin, and you do it with other people. And auditing is obviously done with other people. But the very entry level stuff and all of the training side of things, it is very, very self-led.
Yes, indeed. But you see, the whole, if it's true for you, then it's true. That all sounds very fine and dandy. But on the other hand, if you're reading a policy letter and it's not true for you, well, you better bloody go back and clear words and reread it and so on until it is true for you. So Scientology is one big contradiction. Hubbard contradicted himself on so many things. So it's a continuous cognitive dissonance process to try and to keep yourself progressing through it. So I actually, I pulled up an example. I actually took some notes for this one. I'm prepared.
Amazing.
Yes. So he said, for example, so become completely self-determined on the one hand, but on the other hand, believe everything I say. The very first policy letter that you have to study on every single course, or as it used to be anyway, is Keeping Scientology Working, where for a start it's a 7-page full of jargon. So anybody new in Scientology is going to, that in itself is going to create a lot of confusion, because it typically a new student is going to spend a week trying to get through this, clearing all the words and so forth. But he makes it really plain in this policy letter that he is the only source, the source, and he's referred to as source, not S-A-U-C-E, source, S-O-U-R-C-E. He's source. He is the only source of this of the knowledge and the information. So if it's true for you, it's true, but it's not really. If it's true for you, it's true if I say it. So yeah, that's how I do it.
Yeah, I think just to give people an idea of what this keeping Scientology working KSW thing is when you start in Scientology on a life improvement course or the very introductory level stuff that they give you after doing your personality test or so on. KSW isn't on those because it is, as Martin said, it's a bit intense, and it goes through the idea of, knowing that Scientology is correct 100% of the time. If you apply it correctly, it will work all the time. It's really focused on Scientology is the answer, and if it's done right, it will clear the planet and save humanity. And so it's a bit intense for very beginning, like newcomer type people. So it's not on those very introductory level courses. But as soon as you move up to the academy, which is where the more advanced levels and the grades, and you start doing bridge work in Scientology, you have the bridge to total freedom. It's a step-by-step kind of way of achieving spiritual enlightenment, I suppose. As soon as you start doing anything on the bridge, that's when you start doing your studies in the academy, which is where you read this KSW thing at the beginning of every course. And yeah, it's true that use of language, a video that I believe should be going up before this one goes live. If it's not before, it'll be just after, is this idea of this SP challenge that I came up with of trying to highlight the language that's used in Scientology, because we talk about it a lot. There's a lot of abbreviations: SP, suppressive person, OT, operating theta, and there's hundreds more. And we dial it down massively in interviews and things on SPTV. And I wanted to do this challenge to really highlight how absurd this use of language can be, because it is one of those techniques of creating confusion. Like you say, if you bombard people with words that have different meanings and different abbreviations, it's just one of those techniques that allow people to be confused, and then that puts them in a more suggestible state, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Loaded language is it's familiar to is common to pretty much all cults. I made a little list actually of what to me constitutes a cult and why Scientology is a cult in the first place, and why it's not just a self-help group or a religion. Because again, just going back to keeping Scientology working, the policy letter, he lays it down in no uncertain terms right from the get-go that you're either in or out of Scientology. You cannot be half in or half out. So, people wonder why Scientologists are so fundamentalist, is because they're indoctrinated to be fundamentalist from day one. He talks about Mrs. Pattycake, doesn't he? Turn that wandering doubt in her eye into a fixed, dedicated glare. That's word for word. Fixed, dedicated glare. And he says, she wins and we all win. So that's being rammed down your throat literally from day one. So the other things, apart from loaded language, is information control. This is just my list. It's probably not complete or maybe not accurate, but I just was thinking about it during the week. What makes a cult a cult? Manipulation and pressure. There's always, with cults, there's an us and them mentality. There's always got to be a bogeyman. It's psychiatry, mostly with Scientology. And there's got to be a charismatic leader. And again, in keeping Scientology working, it's right there. I am the only source of the technology. Don't anybody else dare even think about modifying, changing any one little word, because that would be squirrel. And a squirrel is a really bad thing. And of course, the other thing following on from that makes it so super dangerous is the use of labeling and all these terms, what you were just talking about just now. So you can create a thought-stopping mentality in people by just labeling them. So if somebody's an SP, so I was thinking back to when I was on staff and who were the big SPs around at the time. Bonnie Woods was one of them, and John Atack was another one. from even when I was in the Silk, I heard about these people, and I had this picture of these must be monstrous, sort of terrible people, because they're suppressive, they're stopping other people from progressing spiritually and so forth. And of course, John Atac's one of the loveliest guys you could ever meet. I've only ever met him in person once, but he's absolutely charming and unbelievably insightful person. So the use of labeling, so somebody's an SP, or they're a DB, which is degraded being, or they're a this or that or the other, is a very common, trait or characteristic. Yes.
And also by dividing people, that helps with the in Scientology and a lot of coercive groups, it's all about binary thinking, right? You're either with us or you're not. It either works or it doesn't. It's yes or no, it's black or white. And by dividing people, it forces people to start thinking in a really binary way. And as soon as you have that binary thought in your mind, or way of thinking, then it's easier to control someone. Because if you take the example of, political parties, and you look at Maoist China, or Hitler and the Nazis, as soon as you have a division, you could, I don't want to get political, but you could draw similarities with Trump, and what he did was trying to divide people, and you either agree with him or you don't. It forces you to jump on a bandwagon of one or the other, and because of that, you're easily controlled. And in Scientology, it's done in that way of either you're with us, you believe in Scientology, and suddenly, once you've accepted that and made that choice, you're either therefore, well, if you're with us and you're on our side, well, then why wouldn't you want to join staff? Okay, well, you're on staff, why wouldn't you want to join the Sea Org and dedicate your life to it? And then, okay, well, you're in the Sea Org, so why wouldn't you accept whatever we tell you to do, or whatever we want to say to you? And they want to get rid of this grey area. One of the things that took me a long time in recovery, and I'm still working on today, is being okay with that grey area of thinking. You don't have to have a 100% conviction or decision on either side. If someone asks what you think about something or how you feel, it doesn't have to be I feel like this or I think this. It's okay to kind of be in the gray area, and that gray area is not okay in Scientology. You either apply it, believe in it, do it, or you don't.
That's exactly right. You become very certain. You have this great certainty. You've got the answers, and it's a very arrogant, very narcissistic, and very unhealthy way of being things. You're absolutely right. Nuance is lovely. Exploring the sort of. I make a point of listening to podcasters and YouTubers that I don't necessarily agree with, but my favourite ones are the ones where they look at they look at the grey areas, they look at the nuances. So. I love Neil Oliver. I love listening to Russell Brand and Joe Rogan as well. Actually, I think he's great. But yeah, this certainty thing is really interesting, and also the use of fear as well. That was another. I just wanted to dwell on that for a second, actually, because that's a tool that's used in I think anyway. All different cults and religions as well. I was going out, for example, with a girl in the mid 90s, lovely girl. She was a Catholic, and one day we were well, she was a Catholic, but her father, I should say, was a real diehard, a real old Irish, fire and brimstone variety Catholic. And we were talking one day, she and I were talking about life after death, as you do on a nice romantic afternoon walk. And she said, well, I think I've been told to believe that my destiny when I die is that I'll be swimming in fiery pits of hell forever. And I said, okay, right. Well, seriously? She said, yeah, literally, that's what I think. That's what I believe. That's what I've been, taught to believe my destiny is. And I was absolutely shocked. I was stunned. I mean, Catholicism is quite big on guilt and stuff anyway, but this took it to a whole new level. And to me, that's just plain evil. And at the time, as a certain Scientologist, I put my full TR0 valence on, my looked her in the eye and said, no, that's not the way it is at all. I don't believe you should disabuse yourself of that idea completely. And by the way, that wasn't Martin Padfield, the Scientologist, talking. That I would say the same thing today. To me, that's just plain evil to have that hanging over you for the rest of your life, that you think that when you die, that's what's going to happen to you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? And implanting those ideas in people makes them act in a different way. If you believe this is your destiny, this is what's going to happen to you, no matter what, well, then you're already submitting yourself to that, and therefore your actions, your decisions, your thought processes are going to be affected by that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I might just go off on a slight tangent here, actually, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
But it relates back to the recovery process as well. Because one of the things that I really wanted to try and do is use the experience in a positive way. And because first of all, not everything in Scientology was bad by a long shot. This, where I'm sitting here, this office, it looks like a nice office. It was a garage 10 years ago. I converted it myself, single-handedly, from all the skills I've learned on the RPF. So I got some practicals. Osa will probably want to send me a bill now I've said that publicly. But so there was practical things that I gained from it. But I learned some other things as well. But the coming out process, like I said last time, was in many ways much more useful than the being in process. So one of the things I've really tried to hone my skills on is, again, what you were saying a minute ago about grey areas and nuance, and learning to question everything. So if you take what we were talking about a minute ago, so how you can control people, how you can get people to do things that are not necessarily rational. And the last 3 years since 2020 have been really interesting when you look at, you look across the boards at what's been information that we're being told to believe, and big battles about what's information, what's disinformation, and so on. And one of the things that occurred to me, sorry, by the way, just to finish on something else on Scientology before I go into this. You were saying on the last one about how big or small Scientology is. I actually looked it up. There are 1,844 Scientologists in the UK, according to the 2021 census, which, if my math is correct, is 0.002634% of the population. So it's not. Scientology is but a pimple on the arse of society, really, when it comes down to it. So, and whilst I'm quite happy to talk about my experience and the abuses that I saw, and I've got one or two interesting little Tom Cruise stories, what I thought would be more interesting, really, is to how to use that experience and that information that I've gained to see and apply it to what's going on at the moment. So, for example, talking about mind control and so forth, you know how in Scientology there's these slogans. Clear the planet is the obvious one, but there's the bridge to total, not necessarily slogans, but they're usually 3 words like that. There's the International Association of Scientologists, get ethics in, things like that. Well, actually,
that's it. The Sea Org, we come back.
We come back. That's a good one. Yeah. We come back. We stand tall.
Yeah.
There's an interesting parallel between a lot of the way that the messaging has been portrayed since the C19 episode. I don't even know if YouTube allows you to say the actual words, by the way, so I'm going to be careful, going to navigate this quite carefully.
Thank you.
Be kind, be calm, be safe. That was a big one in North America and Canada, not so much here. Face, hands, space. Build back better, safe and effective. And this is, this is being rammed down your throat like hundreds of times a day. And you look at this and you think, well, I look at this. I looked at it and I thought, well, somebody's obviously trying to this is overload. This is beyond marketing. Just take safe and effective, for example. Well, evidence has shown that that's not really true at all. But you had authority figures. You remember you had the Prime Minister there, and then there was what was his name, Patrick Vallance, was it, and Chris Whitty either side of him, and they were the experts. They were, so they knew. So you just took it from them, and they had all these very clever looking charts and graphs that showed you, and they were saying that you needed to take this again, I don't know if I can use the word, but this medical intervention. That's right. So when the medical intervention was introduced, it was, you just had to take it. It was safe, it's effective, and so on. So most people did. Most people being, and I looked this up, 5.5 billion people on the planet. That's about 3/4 of the population of the world have taken this medical intervention. So, what happened to the nuance, like you were talking about? What happened to the debate? Where was the discussion about this? What were the ingredients of this medical intervention? How did it work exactly? Because it was not I can use the word. It wasn't a vaccine in the conventional sense. It worked in a completely different way. So that discussion was just non-existent. And now, on top of that, they used all the loaded language, like the labeling we were just talking about. So anybody that wanted to have a debate or was vaccine hesitant was a conspiracy theorist. They were probably right wing. They were, they were a granny killer even. Oh yes, killing grandma. And it's just really interesting looking at things like that from a viewpoint of information control, because there's pretty strong evidence now that the medical intervention is doing more harm than good. I mean, put it this way: if I came to you with a syringe and a hypodermic needle, and I said to you, Alex, I know you suffer from the flu quite badly, so I've got this thing. It might do the trick for you. Now, I can't tell you what's in it, and it might have some pretty serious side effects, and it's not really tested. Well, we tested it on some mice, but we haven't really tested it. But it's probably going to work all right. It has got lipid nanoparticles in it, which do float around in the body and get into every organ in the body. But don't worry about all that. So yeah, up for it. You ready? What would you say? But that's informed consent. That's the sort of conversations that doctors should have been having, or anybody should have been having before. And yet 3/4 of the population were persuaded to put this thing into their bodies. They had no clue what it was or how it worked, and that's all because of basically information control and obviously commercial interests were at the heart of all that. The old follow the money thing. So yeah, before anybody bombards the comments, by the way, with show me the reference and this and that, I'm just expressing my opinion here, just so you know. I'm not going to get into any debates about it. But, and just looking at it from a viewpoint of thought control rather than actual medicine, because I don't know anything about medicine.
I think it's interesting to look at these things, especially you mentioned information control, and we were talking earlier about what is a cult. I think I don't know if you looked at Dr. Stephen Hassan's book, Combating Cult Mind Control, but he comes up with this model of the bite, this idea of the bite model, which is a way of defining what a cult is or a coercive group. And it's all about behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And it is so true that Scientology fits into that definition, that category of controlling behaviors. You have to, if you look at the idea of studying in the academy or in the course room, misunderstood words and symptoms of an MU, not allowed to yawn or fidget. You have to behave in a certain way when you're studying. Information control, it's completely true. You read the text, you either agree with it or you don't. And if you don't agree with it, you read it again until you do. Thought control, there's no allowance for this grey area or nuance. You have to think that Scientology is the way forward of clearing the planet in KSW, keeping Scientology working. The first reference you read at the beginning of every single course, it says that you have to know that Scientology works and know that it works 100% of the time, and it works 100% of the time when it's applied correctly. So the thought is controlled, and the emotion as well. You know, in Scientology, you push emotion down so far that I tell the story quite often of when I first started going to therapy about a year and a half ago now. I had problems with my therapist because it was something completely separate to Scientology that I was going for. But he was saying you need to feel the emotion here in the room for us to work with the emotion. And the problem wasn't that I was having an emotion and pushing it down. It was that I wasn't even recognizing that I was having or feeling an emotion. I was capable of feeling an emotion because Scientology reprograms your brain to process information in such a way that you don't even recognize it, but you suppress it before it's even there. And that's something that, you know, we're talking about training routines, TR0, bull baiting. The idea is that you can confront any situation. So the TR0 is sitting there with your eyes closed, then with your eyes open and in front of someone else. And there's different ways of doing it. And bull baiting, the idea is that you can confront any situation. Someone can be trying to make you blink or make you, twitch or fidget or react in some way, and you don't because you are present in real time, like in PT in present time. But actually, that hypnotic trance, what it's doing is it's desensitizing you from present time because you're training your brain to not react to all these things. And that's the emotional control side of things. So when you look at Dr. Steve Hassan's look at and definition of what a cult is, Scientology fits all of those things.
Yeah, it does. And when you were talking about therapy just now, and you weren't, your therapist said that you weren't able to sort of touch your emotions, but the whole point of auditing is supposed to be that you are fully able to contact your emotions, to be fully in communication with your auditor. But I wanted to ask you about this in a second, because my experience as a pre-clear, as a recipient of the auditing, aka counselling, was I always found it a little bit. I found it very hard to get into session where I was fully in communication with my auditor, and that partly just maybe personal to me for whatever reason. But I just found the whole rigmarole of getting, are the cans the right size? Do you need cream? Is your belt too tight? Have you eaten properly? How much have you slept? And blah and blah and blah. And this would go on for sort of 5 or 10 minutes, and then there'd be the rudiments, and there's the present time problem, the ARC break, and the missed withhold. And then you think, oh bloody hell, I had a wank last week. Is that going to come up? Am I going to have to spend half an hour talking about that before we get into session? And so I just found the whole process really clumsy and quite awkward. And so very often, by the time we were in session, you're sort of already exhausted, not exhausted, but you're like, you're kind of, Anyway, so we're at Flag, and I paid for 50 hours of what they call case cracking. But actually what it turned out to be was 50 hours of checking, security checking, confessional auditing, but it's not really confessional for the benefit of the person. It's done for the benefit of the organization. every session starts with the words, "I'm not auditing you." So this is the session, I'm not auditing you, meaning that whatever you say in that session can and probably will be used, um, if needed, as necessary, against you in any action in the future. It's not covered by the priest-penitent privileged um, deal. So that was quite a major turning point for me, in my route out, because when I went back to the UK after that, it was just a horrendous experience. I just never wanted to go back to flag again, for a start. But I also spoke to one or two other local Scientologists who had almost exactly the same experience. In fact, well, one of them, he didn't even get as far as the auditing room. This is shortly after the Lisa McPherson tragedy. So the security at Flag was even more insane than usual. It took me 3 or 4 days just to get as far as the Harvard Guidance Center, the HGC, to get the auditing, because of all the endless amounts of interrogations and actions I had to have beforehand. So that was my experience of auditing. I didn't generally find it a conducive environment to really say, to say what I wanted to say. I can probably talk to you, even though I'm on camera, and I know this is going to be, seen by thousands of people. I can probably talk to you more easily and freely than I could have felt I could have talked to an auditor. And honestly speaking, if you want to get some good therapy, go down to the pub with your mate and have a couple of pints and just speak honestly and freely. What was your experience of being a PC in the auditing chair?
Yeah, I think
sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I think it's interesting you say that, because even though that was right after the, so for those of you who don't know Lisa McPherson, look it up. It's a tragic story that of a Scientologist who unfortunately passed away after doing the introspection rundown in Flag. We won't get into it because there's loads of content and stuff out there about it, and just look it up. It's a really important read, and if you're looking up and reading up about Scientology. So even though you were there at that time, or just after, and the security was really tight, it is still like that today. Flag is the mecca of Scientology. It's the headquarters and the place where the best of the best are in terms of auditors. And if you're Flag trained, that's seen as like a badge of honor almost, because you've done the training at the best place and you know how to do Scientology correctly. And there are lots of, you have to be qualified to go to Flag. You can't just pay a load of money and go and do your courses at Flag. Flag is already about 3 times as expensive as anywhere else to study Scientology. You can do a lot of you can't join Scientology at Flag as a new person, but say for example you wanted to go clear and you'd just done your purification rundown, you can do all of those steps that you can do in your local city org, like in London. You could do them at Flag as what, instead, if you wanted to, but they're about 3 times the price, if not more. And then there are certain courses that you can only do at Flag, like Superpower, Cause Resurgence, all that sort of stuff. But the idea is that you have to be, in order to go to Flag, because it is the headquarters, you have to meet certain prerequisites. And that's still the case today. I remember when the Superpower building opened, when I was there working at London Org, there was this big, like, oh my God, this big event's happening at Flag. Everyone that can should go over there for the event. And there were certain people that I was like, are you not going to Flag for the opening? They were like, no, I can't, I'm not qualified, or whatever. Qual just means qualified. And yeah, it's really protected because they don't want another tragic incident to happen, like the Lisa McPherson case. But anyway, went down a tangent there. You asked me about my auditing and what it was like.
Your experience as a preacher,
yeah. I didn't really have any of those issues getting in. The biggest thing for me was not being sessionable, not being studentable, right? If I didn't sleep very well. I've always had a bit of a sleep issue anyway, but particularly worse since Scientology. And the number of times I'd be out book selling until 10 or 11 at night, getting home at midnight, and then being at work in the org at 9 in the morning the next morning, which meant waking up at 7 and leaving at 8 in the morning, I wasn't getting enough sleep to be sessionable, right? I didn't have my roots in. I didn't have the ability to go into sessions. So it was very rare that I did meet the requirements when I was on staff. And so when I did go in, and I was okay in terms of sleep, but I didn't have any issues with that. You know, sometimes I need to have a bit of cream. For those of you who don't know, when you go into session on the e-meter, there are certain things that people do to help you on the e-meter, right? You can have maybe your hands are too dry, so have a bit of cream, or they're too moist, so you have talcum powder to dry them out a bit. You might have cold feet, so they put a blower, like a heater, on your feet. Sometimes the cans are heated. They have like a heat blanket. They put the cans in, so when you hold them, they're nice and warm. And the idea is that helps the e-meter read more accurately or whatever. And everyone has their different things. So once I found my can size, and sometimes I needed a bit of cream, and I always needed warm hands. But other than that, I was kind of away straight away. So I didn't really have any issues. But I did always have an issue trying to understand what it is they're doing, because it's such a formula of, do you believe this, or do you think this, or, you know, it's command driven rather than question driven, apart from sec checks. And because of that, they tell you when you first go into auditing, you don't have to answer questions, because the e-meter doesn't lie. You can just think it, and the e-meter will tell the auditor what you're thinking. But in reality, you do have to answer the questions, because, you know, you have to confess to stuff and whatever, in sec checks particularly. But for me, I found myself in a position of trying to think, what does the auditor, what does the person in front of me want me to say? What do they want? How do they want me to react? Rather than genuinely getting stuff off my chest or reliving past experiences, it was like, what do they want to hear from me that's not going to get me in trouble, that's going to get me out of this room as quickly as possible?
Yeah. I can relate to that.
Whereas real therapy is a completely different experience. I remember when I first started seeing a therapist, it was like, I went in there and said, so what do you want to talk about? What do you want to use this session for? And I was like, what? No, that's your job to guide me, to tell me what we need to work on. Yeah. He was like, no. In real therapy, it's you're the one in control, as the PC, as the student or the patient, or however you want to look at it. It's your time. What do you want to work on? You're in control. And that was the biggest hurdle to get my head around, because in Scientology auditing, the auditor is the one in control. They sit on the other side of the like desk to you, in front of the door. You can't leave the room until the auditor wants you to leave and is ready for you to leave. They're in control.
No, that's right. They literally can't. You're trained as an auditor to. One of the training drills that you do is to physically stop the pre-clear leaving the room. But yeah, you're right. I mean, auditing is very mechanical. It's very robotic in that sense, because you might start with an L1C, which is this one correction form to it's like an extended rudiments, and see what reads from that, and then you might go from there to a green form, and it's just a big long list of things, and see what reads on the meter, and so you're sitting there thinking, well, is that? So yeah, it's and when I was the tech sec in St. Hall Foundation, the CS there, because I was quite
just before we get into the weeds here too much, sorry, just want to clarify, TechSec is technical secretary, so you're in charge of the auditing, the Hubbard Guidance Center. It's actually the same role Aaron Smith-Levin at Growing Up in Scientology. He had the same job at the Advanced St. Hill organization, which is the one over in LA. So you were doing the same job as him, in charge of all the auditors and all the auditing. And CS is case supervisor, the person that looks at everyone's files and determines whether auditing sessions have been done correctly and advises on what the next step is, right? I think that's the easiest way of describing those.
That's right. Yeah, that's fair enough. TechSec was over the three different departments, which was the HGC, the auditing department, the training, which was the course supervisors, and then the technical services area. So I was holding director of processing from above as the TechSec. So one of my jobs was to do DFP or directory processing interviews with PCs who were not progressing very well, or the case supervisor just wanted more information. And Naomi, her name was, she used to say to me, Martin, do one of your specials. I can't see what's going on with this one. Now, the interesting thing about that, because as a DFP interview is free flow. There's no set format. The CS will give you a list of questions that she might want you to work around, but basically, you just see how it goes. It's much more conversational, and I used to get the most phenomenal results from these DFP interviews. So that's why Naomi would say, come do one of your specials. I can't see what's going on with this guy. So, and I could see, because they were done on the meter. The person on the other side was holding the cans. So I'll see these huge reads on the meter. Now it's another whole conversation what's causing those reads. We won't get into that now, but something was making that needle move dramatically. I had one guy who had some situation just hadn't come up in his auditing. I was very easily able to get out of him. I suppose my point is that conversational style was actually a lot more effective than the very formalized structure of the auditing session. And one of the questions I've often wanted to ask people who know about these things, because I don't know, is there's a certain type of when you're getting the L's, or the L rundowns at flag. These are flag only rundowns, which are supposed to unleash your powers as a thing, or what, I don't know.
Your true potential. Yeah.
But there's 3 of them, but apparently L's auditors are trained on a different type of TRs. There's L's audited TRs, and I often wondered what those were, and because it would make sense to me that they were a lot more conversational. They were a lot less. It was a lot less structured, a lot less formal in that sense. But I don't know. I'm just guessing. But anyway, so yes, I think the yeah. If you want to get some good therapy, go down the pub with your friends and have a couple of pints, and that'll do it.
Yeah, and I think that's something to really consider as well, is the idea of talking to people about how you feel and what you think, because that's not something you're allowed to do in Scientology. As much as when we were on staff, we would go to the pub, we were friends. There were times when we were doing really well in the birthday games. We were rewarded with a meal at a restaurant, for example, and we would go out as a whole entire staff cohort and go and have a meal at a nearby restaurant. And it was great. We were really social, but there was never an opportunity to discuss how you think, today went, or how your auditing session went, or what you think about this policy you read the other day, or how that makes you feel. Because in keeping Scientology working, this policy you read at the beginning of every course, it says Scientology works 100% of the time when applied correctly. 100% of the time, and so there's no room for you to disagree. And if you do disagree, it's because you have misunderstood something. You've gone past a word you don't understand, or you've got transgressions. You've done something wrong against the church. You have an overt or a withhold or whatever, and you are therefore a bad person. And because you've committed an overt, you've done something wrong against the church. That's why you're finding a fault with the church, or a fault with L. Ron Hubbard's policies and technology. So that there isn't a situation created where you can have that back and forth of like, hey man, I read this the other day and I didn't quite get it, or I didn't quite understand it, or it didn't make sense to me because I thought this policy said this, and this one doesn't quite add up to that. It doesn't really make sense. What do you think? That's one of the things that got me in trouble in Scientology, was when I would say, I read this and I understand it, but I don't necessarily agree with it. Well, what have you done wrong against the church? What? No, I'm just saying that in this policy here, it says that if you come out of an auditing session and you feel worse than you did when you went in, it's because your auditing wasn't done correctly. Okay, great. Well, I felt worse when I came out of this session, so I think the auditing's done correctly. Well, here's another policy we're going to show you that says the only reason auditing doesn't work on someone is because you have overts and withholds. You've committed a crime against the church. Well, hold on. Those are two completely opposing ideas that don't. It can't be. It has to be one or the other, and which one is wrong? Either one policy is correct and the other one's wrong. But having that discussion is just not possible.
Mm.
The church is always 100% right 100% of the time.
Yeah. I also found that again, going back to the sort of recovery process or the coming out process, it started, well, it's probably started the day I joined, actually, because there isn't a Scientologist that doesn't have doubts. There just isn't. And most people in Scientology now, and certainly anybody that might be under the radar watching this, basically, trust your own instincts. And going back to the mid-90s, and the girl I was seeing at the time, it finished because, well, her head was turned by a new shiny thing came along, and she dumped me for the new shiny thing. But after that, it took me a long time to get over that, and I couldn't find anything in my Scientology toolbox that was enabling me to work through it. And I thought, this is insane. I'm 15 years in Scientology by this time, and something as simple as just being dumped by a chick. I've been dumped before, and it happens. Go off and find another one. I just couldn't get over this. It took me well over a year, actually. It was horrendous. I mean, I hit rock bottom. I don't mind telling you, I got very, very depressed. I called the Samaritans at one point. Just these waves of grief came over, and I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm a bloody Scientologist. Why is there nothing here that I can use to get myself through this and just get on with it? But there wasn't. They're just and my Scientology friends at the time. I was living with a guy. I won't name him, but he's still around. He's still on lines. And I was sharing a house with him in East Grinstead, and he said, "I'll just go and get a session. That's go and get a session." Well, so again, back to that sort of formalized structure. So, okay, first of all, go and borrow some money because I didn't have enough to pay for a session, and then go through all that rigmarole. I found that really, really hard to deal with, that period, but also just didn't make any sense to me that Scientology was tailor-made for such situations, wasn't it? When you're really struggling in life with something, and yet here I was floundering, and I couldn't find any tools or anybody with the tools to be able to help, short of possibly paying hundreds or thousands to go and get some help in the organisation.
And also, you're taught that emotions are a bad thing or a negative thing. In Scientology, you have the idea of an analytical part of the mind and a reactive part of the mind. And the idea of going clear is getting rid of your reactive mind. And the reactive mind is where all of your emotions and your pain and all of the bad stuff that you don't want in your life, for example, is all because of the reactive mind. And if you think logically and using your analytical mind 100% of the time, then you're going to live a happier, healthier life. And emotions get in the way of thinking rationally. That's the mindset of a Scientologist. So when you are going through some sort of trauma or an incident that you're upset about, and you're not 100% VGIs, very good intentions, indicators, sorry, very good indicators. If you're not VGIs, then it emotions don't really matter, right? I remember being in situations before where I was upset about something, or I had an issue about something, and it's kind of downplayed. It's like, oh, well, emotions don't matter. You're bigger than that. You're better than that. Yeah, you have a reactive mind, but you're a thetan. You're a spiritual being with more power, ability, and control than you can imagine. So just rise above it. Emotions aren't real. That's just part of your reactive mind being re-stimulated. So don't worry about those. Just, put them, who cares? Just, think rationally. But what that's doing is squashing your emotions. And actually, emotions are real things that you need to recognize and accept and process, because if you squash them down, it just makes it worse.
Yeah, there's also the case on posting, isn't there? Because obviously,
No case on post.
yeah, I'd had a background in the SEAL by this time, so I was well indoctrinated into that mentality that you described, where you just don't, you just don't have case on post. But yeah, it was bad. I mean, I was selling posters and signs at the time. That was my business at the time, and I really remember that time period really well, because it was so bizarre that yeah, I walked out of one shop I'd just been doing a little bit of business with, and I just collapsed on the pavement, and I was just sobbing like a baby for about half an hour. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Just get over yourself. I suppose also partly, I mean, I come from a background, my father was a very senior officer in the Royal Air Force. He was an Air Commodore, second highest or third highest rank in the Air Force, and highly decorated. He got a CBE. I was there at Buckingham Palace when he got his medal from the Queen.
Wow.
So yeah. So that was my background as well. He was very stiff upper lip, and you didn't talk about your emotions or how you were feeling. I didn't grow up in an environment like that. And relating it back to the getting dumped incident, I suppose there was. You can always relate these things back to your childhood. I mean, on the face of it, it was quite a stable middle class family unit, but there was bullying. There was bullying, and it wasn't bullying at school. It was bullying from within the inside the family. I'm sorry to say, but it was. Sorry if any family members are watching, but you know it's true. My parents died a long time ago, but it was because I was thinking about this during the week since we did part one. It's made me think about it made me think about quite a few things, and I think that is probably one of the main reasons I got into Scientology, was because I couldn't understand why people just couldn't be nice to each other. Well, and I think I did myself a disservice in part one as well by saying that what I wanted to get from Scientology was all about me and getting up the bridge. Actually, no, that's not really true. What it was I wanted to sort myself out so that I could become the helping person that I wanted to be. Actually, I've always wanted to change things if I can for the better, and see injustices made good. I've always had that intention. So going back to the getting dumped story, just so you're aware, and everybody watching is aware, it all came good in the end. I got right. It took about a year, 18 months, but then I got my first flat, bought my first property. I moved out of East Grinstead. That was a big thing, actually, getting out of the Scientology field. I've got a flat in South London. Well, Coulston, you'd probably know Coulston, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Really
nice flat in, Whiteleaf it was, actually. God, I so wish I'd kept that place. And
it's probably worth a lot more now than it was when you bought it. London house prices are insane.
I was crazy selling that place. But anyway, I moved on. But I was on the property ladder, and I got a new career in direct sales. I was made a manager within weeks, and I found new friends. And so things, I did eventually get myself back on my feet. But bloody hell, that was those 18 months were far harder actually than leaving Scientology, if I'm being honest, because I just felt like, how can I end up here? How can I end up in this? You know, I'm a big, powerful ex-SEAL member with all this knowledge, but I was a wreck at the same time. It just, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of lot of stuff missing in Scientology, that they tell you that it will answer all of your questions and it will help you understand life better. But I remember going through, when I first joined as a teenager, I would have been 16 or something, and at the time I wanted to find a girlfriend and, find love and, figure out what I want to do with life and all of this. And I remember asking around, and one of the things I wanted Scientology to help me with was understand exactly what love is and therefore how to find it. And the answer that I was given was, well, if you find someone that you are interested in, you have to have, as long as you have the same purpose in life, that's how you make a good relationship. So, your second dynamic, your relationship, sex, family, all of that, if you meet someone, you both have the same purpose, well, then that's the recipe for a great relationship. And I was like, yeah, but I get that. And I understand why having the same purpose in life would be useful to having a great relationship. But that doesn't help me understand what love is and what that emotion, that feeling is. And I asked away and I tried to find, and there was no answer. And because in Scientology, whether it's good or bad, emotions are just not, they're not really addressed, because emotions are part of this reactive mind. And
Yeah.
yet love is a wonderful and it's a great thing, but there's nothing in Scientology I ever came across that talked about, well, what is happiness, what is love, what are these things, and how
Compassion.
do they happen?
Compassion. This guy I was living with in East Grinstead at the time I told you. He was his girlfriend at the time was fairly new into Scientology, but she was getting quite hardcore fairly early on. She took to it like a duck to water, got right into that. And I'll tell you a little story about this actually. I better not name any names, but this is about a year later, and I've got my flat, the one I just mentioned, in South London, and I got a phone call late one night, quite late, 11 midnight, something like that, and it was this girl, the girlfriend of the guy I was staying with, and she was in a terrible state. She was crying and sobbing, and she said, "Oh, I almost named him. My boyfriend's beating. I think her husband by this time has been beating me up, and I'm da 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 da." And I said, "Okay, just stand by. Just get into another room, detach yourself, and I'll be right down." I got in the car, drove down straight away. Didn't think twice about it. Got in the car, drove straight down from London to East Grinstead. Knocked on the door, made sure she was safe and things were somewhat calm. I said, "Right, get in the car. We'll get you put up somewhere for the night." And I put her up in this hotel, paid for it, left her there, and gave her a ring the next day and made sure she was okay. Anyway, the point of the story is they patched up their differences, I think. As far as I know, they're kind of still together. So fast forward about 10 years, and I've just left the church. And guess who is the very first person to send me a disconnection text? "I've heard you've left the church, or you've joined an anti-Scientology group. I can't talk to you anymore." Oh, thanks. That's what friendship's all about in Scientology. It wasn't, "Hey Martin, I've heard. Hey, what's going on, man? Let's have a chat. I've heard you had some reservations, or you're leaving, and tell me about it." None of that. No. "I am disconnecting from you." Robotic. And literally all my Scientology friends disconnected virtually overnight. Yeah. Friendship, compassion.
And that's a really hard thing. That's a really hard thing to go through. I remember when I first. So my story is really interesting because I got kicked out, rejoining, kicked out again. But I remember after the first time being kicked out, I wasn't declared anything, but I was told verbally that I wasn't allowed to go to the IAS event. I wasn't allowed to do any servicing, etc. And then when I rejoined, there was a board review that looked at it, and they basically said, "Yeah, we shouldn't have kicked you out. We're sorry. You're welcome back." Long story short, I was really upset because overnight, all of the friends that I had made, the people I'd spent day in, day out over the last however many months, selling books and working in the church, and I'd spent a lot of time with these people. They're around the same sort of age, and I was really good friends with them. Charlie Wackley, all of the people that work at the London Org, suddenly wouldn't return my texts or return my calls. And especially when you're a teenager, that really hurts because you're like, hold on, I thought you were my friend, and now you're just not even replying. And then when I went back in the second time, I said, look, I'm still upset because you guys kicked me out. I'm not necessarily so upset about kicking me out. You told me that you shouldn't have done it. But what I'm really upset about is that all these people I considered friends, at the drop of a hat, were instantly not my friends anymore. And that just seems really superficial and really fake to me. And that was really upsetting because I thought these people were my friends. And as you say, there was no, hey man, someone said that you're not allowed to do any Scientology anymore. Like, what on earth happened? Are you okay? There was none of that. It was just absolutely nothing, complete silence. And that's what I went into ARC break sessions for. ARC is Affinity Reality Communication. It's like a triangle in Scientology that's creates greater understanding. But the idea is, I was like, I'm upset because I thought you were my friend, and now you're clearly not. And it's interesting to unpack that because in Scientology, the friendship is genuine, and those people do really care about you. And I'm almost 100% certain those people will be thinking, "Oh God, I thought Martin was a great guy. I can't believe he's done this." But because you're in that mindset of Scientology being correct 100% of the time, and Scientology works, it's the most important, valuable thing you can do as a human being to save humankind. When you're in that mindset, you're going to follow what the church says. And if the church says that you've done something wrong against the church, well then, sorry, I don't want anything to do with you anymore. And it's hard, it's horrible, it's ruthless, but that's the way it works.
You become an overnight SP. You might have got 28 years worth of sterling service and lots of commendations for all your voluntary work here, there, and everywhere, and donations to the IS. But from one day to the next, nope, you're a suppressive person. It's so robotic and so mechanical and so it's farcical. Actually, when you look back on it, it's absolutely farcical. Yeah.
But that's the thing is that binary thinking as well. You're either with the church, you're in the Sea Org, you're on staff, you're going out book selling, whatever it is, you believe in it, you're on our side, or you're not, and you're a suppressive person. There are lots of cases of people drifting away from Scientology and naturally not having to disconnect or anything like this. But when you are fully invested as a Sea Org member or as a staff member or even as a paying public Scientologist that's just doing a lot of courses and doing a lot of Scientology, you're fully invested in your mind. There isn't any leaving quietly. When it all clicks in your mind and you realize what's been going on, how it's been affecting you, suddenly you're no longer just someone that's drifted away, it doesn't believe in it anymore. You're someone that wants to shout about it and talk about how this is affecting you, even if you don't do it in a negative way. Just talking about what you think and how you feel, that's a suppressive act. What do you mean you have feelings or this upset you? No, Scientology works 100% of the time. It can't upset you. It's because you must have done something wrong against the church.
Yeah. Well, that's going back to where we started. It's a very fundamentalist point of view, and that's another thing where a religion becomes a cult, isn't it? It's as soon as it becomes, well, it's our way or the highway. You're either in or you're out. But ours is the right way. We have the word. Scientology is the only hope for mankind. We're the only ones with the tech in our case. But I have to say, most religions are guilty of this. Our God is the right God. Really? Well, I quite actually like the idea of the eighth dynamic in a sense, because the idea of a supreme being, or not supreme being, a universal
life force.
life force or energy. Yeah,
Yeah.
I still can't see anything too much wrong with that, or I don't think of it in those terms, but that makes a lot more sense to me than God. Anyway.
Yeah, that's what they would say in Scientology. Is I remember, you got to remember, I was working in Div 6, the public facing division. So not only was I talking, I was asking my own questions about Scientology, but also I was facing questions day in, day out. I would meet public people who'd never heard of it or who had heard of it, and taking a tour around the information center. I was the one answering the tough questions that people have when they hear about Scientology. They go in to find out more information. So I had a lot of exposure to the PR line that was used against most of these different thoughts and beliefs. And um, one of the kind of, not necessarily answers to questions, but one of the things we would say is when people would ask about what makes Scientology different. Well, in Scientology, there's no element of faith of bowing down to a god and praying for acceptance or whatever. In Scientology, you do it, you apply it. What's true for you is true for you, but you are the spiritual being that's in complete control and with all the ability in the world. Man is basically good is a principle in Scientology. It's in Dianetics, and in Dianetics, Owen Hubbard wrote that the number one goal of any human being is to survive. So therefore, anything anyone does is because they think it's is an urge towards survival. So he said, even in the case of a serial killer or something, the person has gone and done that because for some reason, incorrectly, but he thinks that the doing that is going to lead to a better survival for himself, right? Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, he's doing it because he thinks that's going to make his life better in some way. And you kind of makes sense. That I can get on board with that and see why that is true. But that's the main difference in Scientology to other religions, we would say, is that you're basically good and you're trying to survive better. Whereas in Christianity, there's this idea of the basic original sin. You've from just being born, there's something you've done wrong and you've got to pray for forgiveness, and
Yeah.
it's completely opposite to Scientology. And so in your head, you think, oh, great, I like that because the basis of Scientology beliefs is all positive. Yeah, that's great. Everyone's good. Everyone's got good intentions. Everyone's trying to do the right thing. And that fills you with joy. And you go, oh, great, this is amazing. But actually, at the same time, whenever anything doesn't work or you feel upset about something, well, what have you done wrong against the church? Which is the opposite of what I was telling people day in, day out in the public division of the Church of Scientology of London.
Yeah. Yes. Sectjacks, the use of, is another one, isn't it? It's very, very. It's a kind of a coercive control, but it also keeps you in line, doesn't it? It keeps you on the straight and narrow for two reasons. One, because you know that information might be used in the future, but also just the very fact of putting you in the effect position of you having to tell your auditor these things that you're not necessarily proud of. But I always found that very interesting as well, actually, that a suppressive was defined as somebody who did something against Scientology. Well, again, it's a complete conflict, isn't it? There's the technical definition of a suppressive person, and then there's the administrative version. So you could be a technical SP but not an admin SP, and vice versa. So yeah, Scientology is full of these wonderful contradictions.
Yeah, 100%. And if you've got the time, I thought we could go into sect checks a little bit more, actually, because it's really interesting, because a sect check is, they say with all auditing and sec checks and so on, you're led to believe that even if it's not auditing, it's not going to be used against you, and yet you know that it is. It is saved in a file, and they don't ever delete or remove anything, and anything you say will be used against you, and it's evidenced in some of the hate websites that people like Mike Rinder and Aaron Smith Levin have. Is all of this information that they've gained from different sec checks and auditing sessions that people have had, because they try and embarrass their critics and say, look, well, this person had a thought about this happening. But I just thought, I've just pulled up the Johannesburg, the Joburg sec check here, and it starts off with really simple questions like, are you sitting in a chair? Are you on the moon? Are all cats black? Am I an ostrich? And the idea is it's kind of establishing, truth and getting reads on the meter. But it goes through to really, really hardcore questions like, have you ever been blackmailed? Have you ever blackmailed anybody? Have you ever been in jail? Have you ever been a drug addict? Have you ever had any dealings with stolen goods? Have you ever committed adultery?
I think also on that sec check, isn't there a question of have you ever had sex with somebody of another colour? Because I remember that sec check because I got that sec check, believe it or not, on the EPF, Estates Project Force. Literally within my first 2 weeks of being in the SEAL, I got that sec check. And I was like, what? Have I done what? Blackmail? That was quite an experience. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. The question is, have you ever slept with a member of a race of another colour?
That's it, yeah.
The question before that is, have you ever consistently made a practice of sexual perversion? And the question after is, have you ever committed culpable homicide? Right? The questions are insanely intrusive, but also direct. And I was talking to John Poe about this the other day. Poe on the Go, he's another YouTuber. He's a former law enforcement officer over in the States, and I reviewed in a video the life history, the questionnaire, and the contracts and things that you sign when you first join staff. And I ended up talking to him afterwards about the sec checks and things, and he was saying that even the life history questions are more intrusive than the highest level of US security clearance. The questions you have to get, the vetting you get for that. Which I think is insane, and it's true, but it gives you an idea, asking all of these questions in Scientology, the sec check, is more intrusive than the highest level of security in the US government. It just goes to show how much they want to get in your head and understand everything about you and what's going on in your mind. This is meant to be a religious body, right?
Yeah. Do you remember in our first interview, I told you my recruiter was a girl called Carol Holder? She incidentally ended up being a communicator for David Miscavige. But the period between when she first started talking to me and when I actually joined the SEAL, I was at Loughborough University, and she wrote to me and I wrote back once or twice, and I put something potentially incriminating about myself or in one of the letters, and never thought too much about it. When I got from, again, going back to part one of this, I told you I went to the Information Commission's office and got them to release some of the stuff. One of the few things they did release that Peter Hodkin did pass on to me was a copy of that letter from 1981 where I put this vaguely incriminating thing of something I'd done at Loughborough University. That's how much they keep this stuff. And I also remember very clearly when I was working in the technical division at St. Hill, having to take folders from there and walk them down to the Office of Special Affairs. And similarly seeing sometimes OSA people come. So it was a real thing. There's nothing conspiratorial about it. It really did happen. That if they wanted stuff on a person, they wouldn't hesitate to go straight to their PC folders. So yeah.
And files are moved around all the time in Scientology. I remember files, for example, people, when I was at London Org, people were flying back and forth between London and Flag all the time because it was the golden age of Tech 2. There was superpower rundown building being opened, and it was a big time. There was a lots of people on the TTC, the Technical Training Corps. They were over at Flag training to deliver all this new stuff that's coming out. So people were on staff in London, but they were over at Flag training. So there were people going back and forth all the time. And I remember being privy to quite a few conversations when I was in HCO about like PC folders and going in hand luggage. And essentially, people who were moving between London and Flag staff members would take people's PC files. So PC is pre-clear, that's what you're called if you're a student of Scientology, is receiving auditing. And you have a file. The auditor, just like a counselor, might write down your answers to questions and things and reactions to things on the meter, and keep your notes are kept in a PC file, it's called. You're never allowed to see your own PC folder. But essentially, those files are kept under lock and key. Only certain people have access to them. They're meant to be protected by priest penitent privilege. But essentially, staff members who are going to Flag would take PC folders with them in their hand luggage between London and Flag and back and forth, because A, it's quicker, and B, it's more secure than sending them by post. But also, it's a lot easier to get away with suddenly hiding or losing certain folders. And although I don't have any proof of this being because of a lawsuit or whatever, there were definitely cases of OSA saying to certain people, you need to take this PC folder from London Org to Flag, or you need to take this from Flag to here in London Org. And it would be like, we have this random person's PC folder here in London. Why did someone need to bring that back? And it was just a case of, don't ask questions. We have this person's PC folder now, and that's it. And you go, oh, right, okay. And you look at kind of what was going on at the time, and you realize maybe it's because there was some sort of lawsuit or something going on in America, and it would be really convenient if that folder suddenly wasn't there anymore. And there's no trace of it. There's no paper trail of it being sent because someone's literally taken it in their hand luggage, and it is technically therefore under the control of a different legal entity, because Coercive, the UK version that's actually based in Australia, but the company behind Scientology here, isn't linked to the American one, and so on. So legally they can get around certain things by saying, well, no, we don't have any record of that happening. We don't have that folder. We don't have that document. Because they're not lying, they don't. Because actually, it's in London and it's hidden under the sofa in the HGC or whatever, right? But these things are moved around all the time, and these records are never removed, and they can be used against you. I'm waiting for my hate site. It'll be interesting to see what they have against me, because they don't have much.
No, I'm pretty sure they won't do any hate site against you, because in this country the laws are just, I don't know the detail, but the laws are different over here. My hate webpage was taken down after a matter of days or a week or two, because that just doesn't fly in this country the way it would fly in America. So even though you've almost certainly graduated from PTS to full-blown SP by now, I very much doubt you'll get much in the way of fair game or hate pages, because that just it doesn't work anymore. People are so tuned in, so educated these days on how Scientology works to crush its critics. And with all respect, Alex, you're small fry. They've got much bigger fish to fry. The amount that's going on elsewhere in the world is unbelievable. The cases that they're fighting. It's the fastest shrinking cult in the world. It's, what we were saying in the beginning. We're down to less than 30,000 worldwide, probably. So at the current rate of contraction, it'll be insignificant in 10 or 20 years' time. Will become an irrelevance, hopefully.
Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, I always say about when people ask me this question, have I received any fair game or anything like this? Well, no. And one of the reasons, like you say, is that I'm small fish. They've got bigger fish to fry. David Miscavige is there are lawsuits over in the States where he's personally named as a defendant, with human trafficking and child abuse and things like this.
Mm.
Me talking about my experiences in London it's nothing. But also there's an element of what Bonnie Woods did here in the UK. Bonnie Woods was an American Scientologist that moved over to the UK,
Yeah.
and she was stalked and followed by PIs, like the very typical fair game story we hear a lot of about the Scientology do. And Bonnie Woods took Scientology to court for harassment, and she won. She won the case.
Yeah.
So I think that actually here, not only do they realize that hate websites and stuff don't really work, I think they're also a lot more cautious here because they've already lost a harassment case. A second one, the court wouldn't look at them too kindly if there was a second one, and secondly, they don't want another big PR flap where they lose another court case. They're trying to get religious exemption and acceptance here. They need the least amount of bad stuff about them as possible.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, I think last thing I wanted to just maybe cover a bit more was that recovery process. I think it would be a good way of looping back to how we started the conversation, was what your recovery looked like. Obviously you were talking to Graham Wilson when you were leaving and asking these questions, and what has that process looked like for you? Did you go and seek counselling? Was it quite an instant switch? For me, I left and just naturally drifted away. And it wasn't until about 6 years afterwards that I realised that there were still things affecting me in my brain. I was still processing information in a certain way. And I was like, holy cow, I'm still thinking like this because of Scientology, even though I haven't set foot in an org for 6 years. And that's when it hit home and I started seeing sort of specialist support. But everyone's journey is different. What's your journey of recovery been like?
It wasn't that difficult, I suppose, really, in the sense that from 2001, well, probably since the mid 90s or even earlier, really, I was just on the way out one way or another. So it was almost like the end of a natural progression. And, by this time I had a family, a wife and 2 children. So life was, I was pretty well grounded. Life was sort of busy enough anyway, regardless. And I didn't. I wouldn't say I suffered particularly. It was a nervous time because I never knew what was around the corner. There was, when I was doing certain activities afterwards, just to, as I said in part 1, just to try and wake people up. One of the things that OSA did do, which was in a sense much more effective than fair game, is they had a plant or a spy in the form of Andy Hutton. Do you know Andy Hutton?
No, I don't. I don't recognise that name at all.
Oh, okay. Do you know have you heard of Francis Hutton?
No, the Hutton name is not one I've come across.
Okay.
Who are these Scientologists?
Oh yeah, Francis used to be the CEO UK at one time, and Andy Hutton was quite big cheese in RTC at one time. Oh, by the way, I said last time that Nick was one of the few people at UK staff that I know had been beaten up by David Miscavige. Andy Hutton was another one, actually. I thought of another one. He was also beaten up by David. But Andy Hutton, he and I went back to my very first days in the SEAL. He was in the supervisor in the Continental Training Organisation, and that was what my first job was, to train a supervisor in there. And I got on pretty well with him. But he basically made out that he was coming out as well in 2009. Basically, he was working for OSA. That's the point. He was working for OSA and reporting back, and I thought he probably was, but I probably said a bit too much. So he managed to thwart one or two of my little activities that were planned, quite cunningly. So So that was an irritation more than anything else when I came out, but it wasn't really. I'd say the recovery process overall, like I said last time, it's kind of ongoing. But the thing that really helped me was having a grounded, having a family and having that groundedness. But also just getting lots and lots of data, reading lots of books, and talking to people, and of course all the support around you. And I forgot to mention the Aftermath Foundation on the last video. So big shout out to the guys, who work in and support the Aftermath Foundation, because there's a great thing for anybody coming out now. As much support and help as you would need from them. So the recovery process is kind of ongoing, but got lots of data. But for me now, in the last few years especially, it's been much more about putting to use that whole experience in the wider world. I've written so many times to my local MP about the things that are going on. I do think that we're at a fairly critical point in human history. Actually, I think the last few years has been unlike any other in history, and I just feel that if we don't kind of spot things and nip things in the bud, which are sort of seem to be happening, there's a lot of things that the C-19 experiences initiated. Control measures that are coming down the line, which seem to have no end. So there's central bank digital currencies are on the way, digital IDs are on the way. There's even talk about 15-minute cities. I'm sure you've heard about all this stuff, and it just seems like more and more and more they're using. Scientology is a little bit like a metaphor for what's going on across the world. Really, there's so many parallels between that thought control process and that. Use of information, the fear mongering, the bullying of people to do certain things, and I see the parallels all over the place. And so I've replaced one goal of clearing the planet, which was an empty, hollow, non-existent goal, with a slightly more tangible, slightly more realistic one, but using the knowledge and the tools that I've gained from leaving Scientology, because I do think we are at a very interesting point in history right now, and so I try and apply a lot more compassion to people. I'm a lot more tolerant. I would like to think, from my experience. I'm a lot more careful about things like what I eat. Read the labels on things before I shove them in the shopping trolley. We've got some chickens out here, which is, so I'm trying to become more self-contained. Thinking about, and also your guest the other day, the Mormon lady,
Shalise. Yes, yeah.
What I love about her the way she's constructed her thing is it's all about self-development and ongoing progress. That's how I like to see it. So recovering from Scientology doesn't mean stepping into another religion, but it should mean finding your own spiritual identity in whatever way that works for you. So does that answer your question at all? I'm rambling again.
Yeah. No, I think it's true. I think purpose is a really big one in Scientology. And, in Scientology, talk about what's your purpose in life. And I was told many a time that most people's purpose in life is to help others in whatever way they can. And that's how they get you on staff and in the Sea Org, because they go, well, if you want to help someone, you want to help people, well, why wouldn't you join a staff? Because that's the best way of helping people. Why wouldn't you join the Sea Org? Because you want to help people, right? You think Scientology helps people, right? So why wouldn't you join the Sea Org? And it's this guilt trip. But the whole idea is finding your purpose. And they put it in this way of, well, you are finding your purpose in life and you're doing you're in control, you're doing what you think is right, and you're applying Scientology to make your life better. But actually, it comes down to, well, if your purpose isn't Scientology, well, then we have a big problem here. And I think what you talk about when you talked about finding a purpose outside of Scientology and your own spirituality and your own meaning and that sort of thing, it's important to go on that journey and ask those questions of, well, what do I think about this? What are my thoughts? Because it doesn't have to be, it's going back to that black and white binary thinking thing. In Scientology, it's either Scientology is the answer to spiritual freedom or it's not. There's no way of taking bits of it and kind of thinking, well, I kind of agree with this principle, but I also believe in the idea of karma or Zen, or I believe in a Christian God. In Scientology, they say at the beginning that you can apply Scientology and be a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew. But actually, when you get up the bridge, it gets to a point where you have to fully accept it and you can't be a religion as well. But when you leave Scientology, one of the big things you have to overcome is accepting that you can take bits from different religions and different belief systems, and Scientology, there are good bits in all of these, and there isn't a one answer fits all, right? One solution fits all, because Scientology, you're taught that this is the answer and it applies to everyone and it will work with everyone, and there is no other alternative. When you leave, it's not necessarily finding what you believe in. The first step actually is being okay with taking bits from different sources, because that's not a thing you would have ever done in Scientology.
Yeah, exactly. I do find it also, because I've got a few years on you. I'm a little bit older than you. But as I get older, I get a lot more tolerant. I'd like to think so anyway. And the thing that I like about people like Shanice and yourself and the YouTubers I do listen to, like Neil Oliver, Russell Brand, for example, is all about finding common ground and not necessarily agreeing with everybody, but being prepared to have conversations and respect and appreciate what others have to say without shouting them down. Because one of the other things that I've seen happening over the last few years is this creation of division between people. Brexit was a great example of that. You're either for Brexit or you're against Brexit. Well, hang on a minute. Well, you can be. There's some good things to it. There's some bad things about it. You don't have to take this, this polar position. But there's been so much division being created that doesn't necessarily need to be there. And I don't really think that's by accident, by the way. I think that's, it's almost like the distraction thing. It's the magician's trick of, you distract somebody with this thing over here so that they don't notice that you're doing this other thing over here. So I think, I think loving and respecting others is my new religion, or trying to anyway. Goodness me, I'm sounding like I'm some virtuous, like I'm starting my own cult. I'm not.
You do run the risk of sounding a bit hippie, of like, oh well, I just love everyone, it's all great, and but it's not, it can sound that way, but it's not. It is true. Compassion and understanding are two really key values that are really important for anyone, I believe, and I completely can get on board with that. Is I think the more compassion you have for people and the more empathy, the better the world will be, because you don't have to agree with everyone and their views on everything. But if you have compassion and you listen and you can understand, you don't have to agree with them, but you can see where someone's coming from, and that generates healthy debate and healthy conversation, which is not something that happens in Scientology. You look at Katie Lohman, who was interviewed by Andrew Gold, a current Scientologist. I posed her with the question of, my story of being locked in a room and told to do my OW write up my transgressions. And her answer was, well, what did you do wrong against the church? What did you do to put yourself in that situation? Zero empathy. And that's what Scientology does, is it takes away that empathy and that compassion in someone, and yet at the same time it makes you feel like you do have more than that than you did before, because you believe that doing Scientology is the most helpful thing to anyone in humankind, and by applying Scientology correctly and you're doing the right thing and you're helping that person, which is the most compassionate thing you can do. So when I was locked in a room, I was like, well, this is great, because he's forcing me to do the right thing, and therefore he's showing more compassion than anything. Whereas actually it's not showing compassion, it's zero empathy. But you believe that you are actually being more empathetic and more compassionate than ever by applying Scientology.
Yeah, yeah, I guess so.
It's crazy. Anyway, Martin, is there anything else you wanted to cover in today's session while we're here?
No, just once again, thanks for doing what you do. Thanks to all your lovely audience and commenters, and thanks to all the good people doing all the good work, particularly the Aftermath Foundation, as I say. But all the guys, like Renda Aaron Smith and Mark Heavy, all the guys doing all the fine work, and yeah, let's move on and create a better world. As the great Michael Jackson once said, if you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make the change, isn't it? So that's what it's all about. And I hope.
I love that. And what a great quote to end things on. Martin Padfield, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.